All right. So what do you need to do to help you remember the material in this video? You are ultimately responsible for this material, so you need to figure out what is the best way for you to remember it. Everybody's different. So maybe it's taking notes. Maybe it's creating a flip book. Maybe it's using lots of color and drawing pictures and bubbles and stars and boxes and highlighters. Maybe it's a graphic organizer. Maybe you need to listen to it over and over and over again. Maybe you need to listen to it when you're on a walk. You need to decide how you are going to make sure that you get this information and you remember it, because you're ultimately responsible for this. It will be part of a test. So let's talk science lab safety. So you already looked at a video that talked about the symbols. So let's just talk about some other things. So why is lab safety so important? It's a major aspect of every lab-based science class. And so if COVID wasn't here, your seventh grade class would be lab based, and probably your eighth grade would be lab or activity based, and so would most of your high school lab classes or science classes. Lab safety rules and symbols are needed so that students do not injure themselves or their classmates. So I'm going to say it again. If I am not confident that you will be safe for yourself, your table mates, and your classmates, then you will learn the material by doing something else other than a lab. Okay? I need to make sure, as the person in charge of that classroom, that everyone will be safe when we do the lab. So when in doubt, I'm not going to take the risk. All right, so let's talk some general rules. So you need to be alert and responsible at all times in the lab. Um, and you need to follow all written and verbal instructions carefully. If you don't understand a direction or a part of the procedure, you're going to ask before proceeding with the activity. We are always going to start and talk about the lab. We're going to talk about cleanup. We're going to talk about safety. We're going to talk about the procedure. I'm going to give you suggestions and hints on things that you might give you a hiccup along the way. And you need to make sure that you're following the directions. You don't look around the room and go, "Oh, I like what they're doing," and then you go do that. They might be on a different part of the procedure than you are. So you need to follow the procedure. Okay? Never work alone in the lab. No student can work in the science classroom without the presence of a teacher. So if I'm out in the hallway talking, whatever I'm doing, you may not start that lab until I've instructed you to do so. Um, don't touch the lab materials. Usually I have to set everything up in between the class exchange. Um, so when you walk in the class, your lab's are ready to go, but that doesn't mean it's ready for you to start. When first entering a science room, don't touch any of the equipment or the chemicals or the materials until you're instructed to do so. Okay? Some more general rules. Perform only those experiments authorized by your teacher and carefully follow all written and oral directions. Unauthorized experiments are not allowed. So you can't go, "Oh, what would happen if I mix this and this?" unless it tells you in the directions to do that. You shouldn't go and look at table over there and go, "Oh, I like what they're doing. I'm going to do that." You need to follow your procedure. As a science teacher, we have been doing lots of these labs, and we know what the results should be, and we know what that procedure should look like. So we can look around the room and tell where everybody's at. And when we do labs, everybody doesn't work at the same speed, and that's okay. So not everybody's going to be doing the exact same thing at the exact same time. Do not eat food, drink beverages, or chew gum in the lab. Do not use laboratory glassware as containers for food or beverage. So, there will be some labs, especially when you get into high school and college, where you can't chew gum. That you shouldn't, you shouldn't bring food and drink into a science lab, period. Is it okay now during COVID to bring your bottled water? Yes, because it's bottled water, it's closed, it's not open. And we're not going to deal with any chemicals that become airborne that could possibly get into your drinks. Should you have food in my classroom? No, you should not. All right, so let's look at a few more general rules. Read all procedures thoroughly. Here's my big one, and it's big because 7th graders have a problem with this sometimes. Never fool around or horseplay in the lab. You're going to know when we do a lab, I'm going to tell you ahead of time, there'll be materials out. So even during class exchange, when you come in and we have a lab, sit down. Don't horseplay. Horseplay could mean that you're running in and knocking things over and breaking things. When we're actually doing the lab, no horseplay. You'll know when it is a lab day. Always work in a well-ventilated area. You'll be happy to know that both 8th and 7th grade, we have an exhaust fan, and during COVID, I've been running it every day, so it helps circulate the air in our room. So a couple more things. Observe good housekeeping practices. Work areas should be kept clean and tidy at all times. I will set you up so that your workspace doesn't have a lot of extra stuff. When we get it messy, then accidents tend to happen and they're harder to clean up. So I'll make sure I help you with that. Be alert and proceed with caution at all times in the laboratory. Notify the teacher immediately of any unsafe conditions you observe. I do notice that oftentimes, like if we are picking up a liquid, or we're picking up our trays of materials, you feel like you need to run to go get those. There are plenty of materials for everybody. I don't need you running from place to place. I don't need you walking fast, because whatever spills, you're going to have to clean up. So we need to make sure that we're safe and we're cautious, and that we're not running and we're not horseplaying. Dispose of all chemical waste properly. Never mix chemicals in a sink. Sinks are used for water only. Check your teacher for disposal of chemicals and solutions. So I will have a waste bucket. Labels and equipment instructions must be read carefully before you use them. Set up and use equipment as directed by the teacher. So you should know how to use a triple beam balance. We'll go over it just to refresh your memory. You should know how to use a microscope. We'll go over it. You should know how to use a graduated cylinder. These are all things that you have done before. Keep hands away from face, eyes, mouth, and body while using chemicals or lab equipment. Wash your hands with soap and water after performing all labs. That's why we have sinks in our room. I will always turn my alarm on, usually depending on what the equipment and the cleanup is. I'll usually have my alarm going off 5 minutes prior to normal, so that gives us plenty of time to clean up and wash our hands and get everything back the way it was before we started. If you follow directions and you start cleanup when I ask you, there'll be plenty of time to take care of everything we need to take care of. Experiments must be personally monitored at all times. Do not wander around the room. Do not distract other students, startle students, or interfere with their lab experiments of others. You and your teammates, usually your table mates, are responsible for your lab. And how you do your lab, you might get different results than how the other table does their lab. And sometimes I give different tables different labs. So you need to make sure you're following your procedure, you're dealing with your table mates, and don't worry about what's going on in other tables. General rules. So know the locations of the operating procedures of all safety equipment, first aid kits, fire extinguisher, know where they are. I am not going to expect you to administer first aid or use the fire extinguisher. There is a black button over by the fire extinguisher, and it is a call button to the office. So if there's an emergency in my classroom, I'm going to look at the closest kid and I'm going to say, hit that black button, and you all are going to be silent, because I can talk to the office over the intercom or the speaker in my ceiling. And if you're talking, I can't do that. And that way I can deal with whatever issues simultaneously while talking. So, like last year, I had a student faint in my class. So, black button was pushed, students went and sat down. I was addressing the student who had fainted as I was talking to the office and letting them know what happened so Angie could come down and take care of it. It all works wonderfully. Students kept on working. We had a clean, open area for the person who had fainted. They came back to, and Angie was there, and everything was just fine. So I'm not going to get excited about. I'm not going to get loud and obnoxious. I'm not going to go, oh my gosh. We're going to all act calm, and you're going to listen to instructions, whatever they are. If we have a fire, if we have an electrical fire, if we have an emergency drill, whatever it is, you need to be calm and listen to instructions. So glassware safety. So I have this gentleman, and you're going to find that most science labs say you need to wear closed-toed shoes. If that has to happen, then I will let you know in advance, but not generally in junior high. Not always are you going to need to wear gloves, but oftentimes you're going to need to wear goggles. Anytime chemicals, heat, or glassware are used, you're going to have to wear goggles. Anytime there's any sharp things that could go into your eye, you're going to have to wear goggles. There is no exception to this rule. If you cannot follow this rule, then you will learn a different way than besides doing our lab. A typical rule is that long hair is pulled back, dangling jewelry, baggy clothes, all those things that might entangle or are things that we don't want to deal with. So, like if we are working with chemicals and you have sandals on and it spills, well, now it's all over your feet. And now we have to rinse off your feet in a sink, and it's just not a good thing. So, having closed-toe shoes. So, like if a beaker breaks on the floor and you have sandals on, well, then we're probably going to send you to the nurse so the nurse can make sure there's no glass in your toes. There was one time I was wearing a long necklace and I had some test tubes and beakers out, and the necklace kind of caught on them and spilled those things. So there is some legitimacy to that. But generally speaking, it's okay unless I tell you ahead of time. Report all accidents and injuries immediately. It could be a spill, it could be a break, it could be a cut, it could be a poke. You need to let me know. We don't need to panic. In most cases, I'm just going to say, go wash your hands with soap and water. Let's put a Band-Aid on it. I'll send you to the nurse if we need to, so she can take a look at it. Most of the time, it's not that big of a deal. You need to get my attention so that I can get over there right away, because during labs, there's usually lots of talking. Let's see. So never handle broken glassware with your bare hands. And I'm going to investigate and examine all the materials I give you, but sometimes I might miss something. So I'm going to ask that every time you get a tray of your materials, you look and make sure nothing's chipped or cracked or dirty before you start. All right, so this is a typical picture of an eye wash. This isn't exactly ours. But what happens is water kind of bubbles out of those little faucets, just like a water fountain. And we hold your eye open and we just kind of carefully stick it in there. Okay? So if something gets in your eye, you're going to immediately tell me. I'm going to come to you. We're going to go over and take care of it while everybody else keeps doing what they need to do. We'll push the black button. We'll let the office know that Angie needs to come on down, and she'll take you down to her office and probably look in it with her equipment to make sure everything's okay. We'll tell mom and dad, and if she doesn't have the right equipment, you might see a doctor. Chemicals in the lab are to be considered dangerous. Avoid handling chemicals with fingers. Always use tweezers. When making an observation, keep at least a foot away from the specimen. Do not touch, smell, taste any material. If the instructions ask if you have a substance with an odor, you're going to hold the container away from you and you're going to waft the fumes to you. Quite frankly, most of the chemicals we're going to use in our lab are not hazardous, but we need to get in the habits that they are, because eventually they will be, and we need to get into that practice now. So never touch, never taste, never drink, never smell any chemicals unless the teacher says it's okay. Never put your nose into a container. All right, so check the labels on all chemicals twice before removing the contents. Take only as much as you need. Never return unused chemicals into the original container, because once you take it out and put it into your container, you've contaminated it. So if you put it back in the original container, you've now contaminated all of that. Never remove chemicals or any other material from the lab area. So nothing goes out my door. Heat and electrical safety, most of us already know this. We don't immerse hot glassware in cold water because the glassware will shatter and crack. Don't operate a hot plate or any electrical device near water. Take care that your hair and clothing and hands are a safe distance from a hot plate at all times. And use the hot plate. Use of the hot plate is only allowed in the presence of a teacher. You cannot do it in the room by yourself. Heated glassware remains very hot for a very long time. They should be set aside in a designated place to cool and picked up with caution. Use tongs or heat protective gloves when necessary. Please remember the glassware when it's hot looks just like it's when it's cold. You cannot tell the difference. Do not place hot apparatus directly on the lab desk. Always use an insulated pad, kind of like a hot pad. Allow plenty of time for the hot apparatus to cool before touching it. The safety shower, you've seen it. This one has a handle. Ours is not set up like this. Ours has a handle in the wall. It is checked every year. I've never had to use it. This is an eye wash. It looks a little different than ours, but it's kind of similar. So the water is going to come out of those black nozzles. No, I've never had to use our eye wash because I make sure that I am confident that everybody in my classroom will adhere to the safety rules. Safety goggles. These are our typical goggles. There are goggles and there are glasses. We have goggles. Hopefully someday we will get glasses. Each science lab will have something different, possibly. So fire extinguisher, we have one. I am trained on it. It is tested every year. We do not have a fire blanket. We do not have a fume hood because the chemicals we use in 7th grade are not caustic, but you will see fume hoods in your high school. So let's take a look at this for a minute. So what's wrong with this picture? Based on the science rules we just went over and the labels that you've already heard about, see how many broken rules that you could find. So pause this and jot them down. All right. So did you come up with, I don't know, maybe at least 5? Can you come up with more? All right, let's take a look at the next picture. Let's take a look at this one. What's wrong with this picture? So let's see. Can you come up with 5? Pause it here. Well, I can see more than 5. Can you come up with more than 5? All right.